Master money. Build success. Transform your future. Welcome to Nikhil Inspireverse.
Consider this. Almost every technology you use today, your phone, your Wi-Fi, your streaming service, even the device you're watching this on, traces its DNA back to a single building in Murray Hill, New Jersey. A building most people have never heard of. Inside that building, a group of scientists were handed something almost no one in corporate America ever receives: unlimited time, unlimited money, and zero pressure to make a profit. Their only job was to think. What happened next didn't just change technology, it changed civilization. This is the story of Bell Labs, the most productive research institution in human history, and the company that accidentally invented the modern world.
Our story begins not with a scientist, but with a monopoly. By the 1920s, AT&T had achieved something remarkable and deeply controversial. It controlled virtually all telephone communication in the United States. Every call made, every wire strung, every operator who said "connecting you now," all of it flowed through AT&T. The US government wasn't thrilled about this. Regulators circled, antitrust threats loomed. AT&T needed a strategy to justify its existence, and fast. So AT&T made a calculated bet. Instead of fighting the government on legal grounds, they would make themselves indispensable. They would become so scientifically valuable, so fundamentally important to American progress, that dismantling them would feel like national suicide. In 1925, AT&T formalized this strategy by launching Bell Telephone Laboratories, a dedicated research division with a mission unlike anything corporate America had ever attempted. Bell Labs would not chase quarterly profits. It would chase the future. And they had the money to do exactly that. Every time an American picked up a telephone, and by the 1920s, tens of millions did, a small fraction of that revenue flowed directly into Bell Labs. It was essentially a science tax on an entire nation. And what that money bought the world was nothing short of extraordinary. To understand what Bell Labs accomplished, you have to understand what it felt like to work there. Imagine being handed a badge, shown to an office, and told, "Go discover something." No product deadline, no investor presentation, no quarterly review, just pure, unstructured intellectual freedom backed by essentially unlimited resources. The physical design of Bell Labs was itself an experiment. The hallways were deliberately long, uncomfortably long, so that scientists from completely different disciplines were forced to bump into each other. A physicist would collide with a chemist. An engineer would stumble into a mathematician. These accidental conversations, these hallway collisions, were not a bug in the design. They were the entire point. Management understood something profound. The best discoveries don't happen when you're looking for them. They happen when two unrelated ideas crash into each other at the right moment. The results were almost incomprehensible in their scale. Between the 1920s and the 1980s, Bell Labs scientists produced innovations that formed the bedrock of modern life. The transistor, the laser, information theory, the solar cell, the Unix operating system, cellular networks, fiber optic cable, satellite communication, the charge-coupled device that makes every digital camera work. One institution, decades of breakthroughs, over 30,000 patents filed, 8 Nobel Prizes awarded to Bell Labs scientists. But the invention that would ultimately reshape civilization almost didn't happen at all.
By the late 1940s, AT&T had a serious problem. Vacuum tubes, the technology powering telephone amplifiers and early computers, were unreliable, expensive, and generated enormous heat. They burned out constantly. Maintaining the telephone network meant employing armies of technicians whose sole job was replacing failed tubes before calls dropped across entire regions. AT&T needed something better, something smaller, more reliable, cheaper to produce. They handed the problem to a team inside Bell Labs and told them to fix it. The team was led by William Shockley, a brilliant and deeply difficult man whose ego was matched only by his intelligence. Alongside him worked two scientists who would prove essential: Walter Brattain, a warm and practical experimentalist, and John Bardeen, so quietly brilliant that people routinely underestimated him until the moment they stopped underestimating him entirely. The three men approached the problem from different angles, frequently clashing, occasionally refusing to speak to each other for days at a time. Shockley in particular had a habit of pursuing his own theories in secret, presenting results to management as solo discoveries when the work had been collaborative. Tensions ran high, progress ran slow. And then, on December 16, 1947, in a cramped laboratory with equipment cobbled together from spare parts, Brattain and Bardeen placed two gold contacts on a sliver of germanium and ran a current through it. The signal that came out the other side was stronger than the signal that went in. They had amplified electricity using a solid piece of material, no vacuum, no glass tube, no heat required. They called it the transistor. They had no idea what they had done. What they had done was give civilization its nervous system.
The transistor changed everything, but it changed everything slowly, which is often how the most important things work. In the years immediately following its invention, the transistor seemed like an interesting engineering solution to a specific telecommunications problem. Useful, certainly. World-altering? That part wasn't obvious yet. Bell Labs, under pressure from the same antitrust regulators who had pushed AT&T into building the lab in the first place, was actually required to license the transistor technology to any company that wanted it for a modest fee. AT&T's lawyers had negotiated a deal with the government: keep the monopoly, but share the science. It seemed like a concession at the time. It turned out to be the most consequential forced generosity in the history of technology. Because among the companies that lined up to license the transistor was a small Japanese electronics firm called Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo. You don't know that name. You know their other name. The name they adopted partly because Tokyo Tsushin Kogyo was difficult for American customers to pronounce. They called themselves Sony. And the transistor radio they built using Bell Labs technology didn't just sell well, it fundamentally changed how humans consumed music, news, and culture. For the first time, a teenager could hold the entire world in their hand. This was the pattern Bell Labs repeated, invention after invention. They would discover something fundamental, the government would ensure it couldn't be hoarded, and the technology would scatter across the global economy, compounding and combining with other ideas until something unrecognizable and magnificent emerged. The invention that connected all of it, the one that truly earns Bell Labs the credit for accidentally inventing the modern internet, came not from a laboratory experiment, but from a single man's mind wrestling with a single question. How much information can you actually send through a channel, and what is the absolute theoretical limit? The man was Claude Shannon, and in 1948 he published a paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication that most people have never read and almost everyone has benefited from. Shannon was, by all accounts, a genuinely strange person in the most productive possible sense. He juggled in the hallways at Bell Labs. He rode a unicycle. He built mechanical mice that could navigate mazes. His mind operated at a frequency most of his colleagues couldn't quite tune into, and he seemed perfectly comfortable with that. He didn't publish often. When he did, it mattered. What Shannon did in that 1948 paper was establish the mathematical foundations for all of digital communication. He defined the bit, the fundamental unit of information. He proved that any message could be encoded, compressed, and transmitted with perfect accuracy as long as you stayed within the channel's capacity. He showed that noise was not the enemy of communication. It was a problem with a mathematical solution. In one paper, he essentially wrote the rulebook for every digital system that would ever exist, from the CD player to the smartphone to the satellite transmitting this video to a server somewhere that delivered it to your screen. Shannon didn't invent the internet, but without Shannon, the internet is mathematically impossible. By the 1960s and 70s, Bell Labs was operating at a scale and with a confidence that bordered on institutional arrogance, and given the results, they had earned it. The lab attracted the best scientists in the world, offered them resources no university could match, and created an environment where the right answer was
always more important than the comfortable one. It was in this environment that a small team of engineers, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie among them, built something they initially described as a comfortable operating system for programmers who found other systems too cumbersome. They called it Unix. Unix became the operating system that almost every server on the internet runs on today in one form or another. Linux, the open source system powering the majority of the world's web infrastructure, is a direct descendant. Android, which runs on billions of smartphones, traces its lineage through Unix. The C programming language, which Ritchie developed alongside Unix, influenced virtually every programming language written in the subsequent 50 years. Bell Labs had done it again. Not trying to invent the future, just trying to solve a problem that was in front of them. Accidentally building the foundation of everything.
But here is the part of the story that nobody who tells the Bell Labs legend likes to sit with for very long. Because the same forces that had originally created Bell Labs eventually destroyed it. In 1984, after a decade of antitrust battles, the U.S. Department of Justice broke up AT&T. The monopoly that had funded Bell Labs, that telephone tax on an entire nation, was dissolved. AT&T was split into 7 regional companies, and Bell Labs was suddenly attached to a parent organization that no longer had monopoly revenues to fund unlimited curiosity. The financial pressure that had been deliberately kept outside Bell Labs' doors was suddenly inside them. The change was not immediate. It was gradual, which made it worse in some ways, like watching something you love decline slowly rather than break cleanly. Research timelines shortened. The freedom to pursue ideas with no commercial application began to quietly disappear. Scientists who had spent careers following their curiosity wherever it led found themselves presenting to business units, justifying their existence in the language of return on investment. The hallways were still long, but the collisions became less frequent and less free. By the 1990s and 2000s, what had been the greatest research institution in human history was, organizationally speaking, a shadow of itself.
The story of Bell Labs asks a question that has no comfortable answer. If the most transformative technologies of the last 100 years, the ones that built the modern economy, that connected billions of people, that made your smartphone more powerful than the computers that guided the Apollo missions, if all of that came from a place deliberately shielded from profit pressure, what does that tell us about how innovation actually works? We live in an era that celebrates the startup, the pitch deck, the minimum viable product, the pivot, the exit. We have built an entire mythology around the idea that markets, left to optimize, will produce the best possible outcomes. And markets do produce remarkable things. But markets optimize for what can be monetized now or soon. They are structurally uncomfortable with the question that produced the transistor, that produced information theory, that produced Unix. The question of what is fundamentally true, regardless of whether anyone can currently sell it. Bell Labs existed in a strange and unrepeatable gap in history, a gap created by monopoly economics, government pressure, and the ambition of a handful of executives who understood that the most valuable thing they could do was hire brilliant people and get out of their way. That gap has closed, and we have not found a replacement. The technologies you use every day were not invented by a startup. They were not produced by a pitch competition or a hackathon. They were not the result of market forces seeking efficiency. They were discovered by scientists with long hallways, long time horizons, and the rare institutional gift of being told that the only thing that mattered was finding out what was true. That building in Murray Hill, New Jersey changed the world. And the most honest thing we can say about it, the most uncomfortable and important truth, is this. We built it once, by accident, inside a monopoly, under regulatory pressure, for reasons that had as much to do with corporate survival as scientific idealism. And we have never quite figured out how to build it again.
The transistor is in your pocket right now. Billions of them, in fact. More transistors in your smartphone than there are stars visible to the naked eye on a clear night.
Claude Shannon's mathematics are running silently beneath every message you send, every video you stream, every search you make. The long hallways of Bell Labs are empty now, but the ideas that collided inside them are still moving, still compounding, still building the world we live in. We hope the story of Bell Labs reminds you that the most important things are often discovered not by people chasing a goal, but by people given the freedom to be curious. And that the institutions we build, the environments we create, the pressures we apply or choose not to apply, shape not just what gets made, but what becomes possible.